Welcome to another video. Christmas is a time for joy, togetherness, and celebration. But for some, this holiday brought experiences far from comforting. Seemingly peaceful places turned into the setting for unexplainable events, and what should have been a moment of peace became pure terror. Today, I bring you real stories from people who lived through chilling experiences during Christmas. Stories that will make you think twice before turning off all the lights in your house. Let's start with the first story. My name is Elizabeth, and I never imagined I'd spend Christmas alone, or that it would become the most terrifying night of my life. Being a nurse, I've gotten used to working odd hours and holidays, but this year was particularly difficult. My family lives across the country, and I couldn't get the time off to visit them. So, I resigned myself to spending Christmas Eve alone in my little rented house. The evening started off quietly. I had just finished a long shift at the hospital and was looking forward to relaxing. I made myself a cup of hot chocolate, turned on some Christmas lights I'd strung up in the living room, and settled onto the couch to watch one of those cheesy holiday movies. The house was old, but I liked its charm. It had creaky wooden floors, high ceilings, and big windows that let in the soft glow of the streetlights outside. There was something cozy about it, especially with the tree lights twinkling in the corner. Around 10 p.m., I started to hear faint noises coming from upstairs. At first, I dismissed them as the house settling. It wasn't uncommon for old houses to creak. But as the minutes passed, the noises grew more distinct. It sounded like soft footsteps moving across the floor above me. I froze, listening intently. The house was supposed to be empty. My roommate had gone home to her family for the holidays. I told myself it was probably my imagination, but the sound of the steps continued, slow and deliberate, as if someone was pacing back and forth. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, I thought it might have been a raccoon or some other animal that had gotten in. But the steps were too heavy for that, too human. I grabbed my phone and cautiously moved toward the staircase. "Whoever's up there, you need to leave." "I'm calling the police," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence. I took a deep breath and climbed a few steps, my phone flashlight cutting through the darkness. The upstairs hallway was empty, the doors to the bedrooms closed. I checked each one, my heart pounding in my chest. Nothing. Feeling foolish, I went back downstairs, convincing myself it must have been the wind or the house creaking again. But as I sat back down on the couch, something caught my eye. The Christmas tree lights flickered, then went out completely. I stared at the tree, my breath hitching. The rest of the house was still lit, so it wasn't a power outage. Then, without warning, the lights flickered back on, but they weren't the same soft, warm glow they'd been before. They were brighter, almost harsh, casting strange shadows on the walls. And that's when I saw it. In the reflection of the window across from the tree, there was a figure standing behind me. It was tall and shadowy, its form barely distinguishable, but it was unmistakably there. My heart stopped as I whipped around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. The lights on the tree began to flicker wildly, the bulbs buzzing as if they were about to explode. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything went dark. The house was completely silent. I scrambled for my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the room. I felt a cold breeze pass by me, though all the windows were shut. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and I had the overwhelming sensation that I wasn't alone. I didn't wait to find out what was happening. Grabbing my keys, I bolted out the door and into my car. I spent the rest of the night parked in the lot of a nearby diner, surrounded by the comforting hum of other people. I never told my landlord what happened, but I moved out of that house as soon as my lease was up. To this day, I can't explain what I experienced, but Christmas hasn't felt the same since. Every time I see a tree lit up, I can't help but remember the shadows it cast that night, and the figure standing behind me. Now let's move on to the second story, or are you already scared? Growing up, Christmas was always a time of joy and family in my house. My name is Emma, and last year's Christmas was supposed to be no different, except for one thing. My parents decided to take a last-minute trip to visit my grandparents, leaving me home alone. I didn't mind. At 20 years old, I figured I could handle a quiet night to myself. Little did I know, that night would haunt me forever. The evening started off uneventful. I had some leftover pizza, put on some Christmas music, and curled up on the couch with my dog, Milo. It felt strangely peaceful being home alone during the holidays. Around 9 p.m., the snow outside began to fall heavier, blanketing the street in a thick, quiet stillness. I remember staring out the living room window, watching the snowflakes dance under the streetlights, when something odd caught my attention. A black van slowly drove past the house. At first, I didn't think much of it, probably a neighbor or someone lost in the snow. But then it stopped just down the street, idling for a moment before turning off its headlights. The van sat there, dark and still, as if whoever was inside was watching. Trying not to overthink it, I locked the doors and went upstairs to my room, Milo trotting close behind me. I figured I'd just call my parents, wish them a good trip, and go to bed early. But as I reached for my phone, Milo started growling, a low, menacing sound I'd never heard from him before. I froze, listening. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the snow outside. Someone was walking around the house. My heart began to race as I turned off the lights and peered out the window. Two figures, dressed in dark clothing, were standing by the back door. One of them was holding a crowbar. Panic surged through me. They thought the house was empty, probably noticed the lack of cars in the driveway. I grabbed Milo, trying to keep him quiet, and crept to the corner of my room. My mind was racing. Should I call the police? Should I try to scare them off? Before I could decide, I heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs. They were inside. I quickly dialed 911, whispering my address to the operator before sliding my phone under the bed to muffle the light. Milo, sensing my fear, went silent as I crawled under the bed with him, clutching his collar to keep him still. The footsteps downstairs were heavy, deliberate. They were searching the house, opening cabinets, flipping chairs. I could hear their muffled voices, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then I heard them coming up the stairs. The sound of their boots on the wooden steps echoed in the silence. I held my breath, my entire body trembling. Milo stayed perfectly still, as if he understood the danger we were in. They moved from room to room, opening closet doors, pulling drawers out of dressers. I could hear them in my parents' bedroom, then my brother's room. And then, they came into mine. One of them turned on the light, flooding the room with a harsh brightness that spilled under the bed. I pressed myself as far back as I could, praying they wouldn't look down. "Check the closet," one of them said. I watched their boots move across the floor, pausing in front of my closet. The door creaked open, and I heard the rustling of clothes being pushed aside. "She's not here," the other one said. "Let's grab what we can and go." Relief washed over me as their footsteps retreated, but I didn't move. I stayed under the bed, shaking, until I heard the distant sound of sirens. When the police arrived, the intruders were already gone. They had taken some jewelry and a few other valuables but left most of the house untouched. The officers assured me they would patrol the area for the van, but I didn't sleep that night. Even now, months later, I can't shake the memory of those boots pacing around my room, just feet from where I was hiding. Christmas, once my favorite holiday, now feels tainted by that night. It's hard to find joy in the lights and music when all I can think about is the darkness that crept into my home. Now, the third story. Christmas has always been a big deal in my family. My name is Henry, and every year, we gather at my uncle's house for the holidays. It's a tradition that's always been filled with laughter, food, and stories late into the night. But last Christmas, something happened that changed the way I look at these gatherings forever. My uncle's house is old, sitting on a large, snowy property in the countryside. It has this warm, rustic charm, stone fireplace, creaky wooden floors, and rooms filled with family heirlooms. It's the kind of place that feels timeless. That night, after a long evening of Christmas dinner and exchanging gifts, everyone finally started heading to bed. I was sleeping in one of the guest rooms on the second floor, with the faint sound of the wind whistling through the old windows. I woke up around 3 a.m., feeling thirsty. The house was completely silent, the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, almost suffocating. I got up, careful not to make any noise, and started down the hallway toward the kitchen. As I passed the staircase, I noticed a dim light coming from the living room below. Curious, I peeked over the railing, thinking maybe someone had fallen asleep with the TV on. That's when I saw him, my uncle. He was sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, but something about him looked wrong. The fire had long since died down, leaving only faint embers glowing in the dark. His body was slouched forward, his head hanging unnaturally low, as if he had fallen asleep in the middle of sitting up. "Uncle Mike?" I called softly. He didn't respond. I hesitated, debating whether to go back to my room, but something compelled me to go downstairs. As I approached, I realized his breathing was strange, shallow and rapid, almost like he was hyperventilating. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer. That's when he slowly lifted his head. His eyes locked onto mine, and my heart dropped. They weren't normal, his pupils were blown wide, almost black, and his face was contorted into an expression I can only describe as inhuman. "Why are you awake?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, nothing like the uncle I knew. I just wanted some water," I stammered, stepping back instinctively. He stood up abruptly, towering over me. His movements were jerky, unnatural, as if he was being controlled like a puppet. "You shouldn't be awake," he repeated, his head tilting slightly as he stared at me. I backed away, my mind racing. My uncle had always been kind, gentle. This wasn't him. It was as if someone, or something, was wearing his face. "I'll just go back to bed," I managed to say, my voice trembling. But as I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm with a strength that didn't match his age. His grip was ice cold, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice rising, almost growling. Panicked, I yanked my arm free and ran up the stairs, slamming the door to my room and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone as I texted my mom, who was in the room next door. A few minutes later, I heard her knock softly on my door. When I opened it, she looked confused and groggy. "What's wrong?" she asked. I told her what had happened, but when we went back downstairs to check, my uncle was sitting calmly in the armchair, fast asleep. The strange expression was gone, his breathing normal. The next morning, I tried to bring it up casually, asking him if he'd been awake during the night. He laughed, shaking his head. "No, I slept like a rock," he said. I didn't press further, but the memory of his face that night still haunts me. I don't know what I saw or if I'll ever understand it. All I know is that something was wrong, and it's changed the way I see my uncle and Christmas forever. Let's go to the fourth and final story. I wonder if you've already run away from fear. Christmas last year was supposed to be different. My name is Brendo, and my family decided to break tradition and rent an Airbnb in a remote area to celebrate the holidays. The idea was to escape the city and enjoy a quiet, snowy Christmas surrounded by nature. The house we chose was a large, old-style cabin, tucked away in the woods, perfect for what we thought would be a cozy and memorable holiday. We arrived on the 23rd, and at first, everything seemed perfect. The house had a warm, rustic charm with its wooden beams, stone fireplace, and large windows that overlooked the snowy forest. My parents, younger sister, and I spent the evening decorating the Christmas tree we'd brought with us, drinking hot chocolate, and playing card games. The first strange thing happened that night. While we were sitting by the fireplace, we heard what sounded like soft footsteps coming from upstairs. My dad brushed it off, saying it was probably the old wood creaking because of the cold. But as the night went on, the noises didn't stop. They seemed deliberate, slow, pacing steps that moved from one end of the house to the other. The next morning, my sister and I decided to explore the property while my parents prepared breakfast. We found an old shed behind the house, locked with a heavy rusted chain. Through the gaps in the wood, I could see what looked like tools and some old furniture, but nothing out of the ordinary. Still, something about the shed made me uneasy, as if we were being watched. That night, the atmosphere in the house shifted. My mom was the first to notice something odd. While we were setting the table for dinner, she froze, staring out one of the large windows. "Did you see that?" she whispered. I looked outside but saw nothing but the snowy darkness. "See what?" I asked. "A shadow," she said. "It moved across the yard." We tried to brush it off again, but after dinner, things escalated. While we were watching a Christmas movie, my sister screamed. She was pointing toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "There was someone there," she said, her voice trembling. My dad immediately got up and checked the hallway, but there was no one. Still, we couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Later that night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was my parents talking in the next room, but as I strained to listen, I realized it wasn't coming from their room, it was coming from the hallway. The whispers were low and indecipherable, like multiple voices speaking at once. I got up quietly and opened the door just enough to peek outside. The hallway was empty, but the air felt heavy, oppressive. As I stood there, I saw it. A dark shadow moved across the wall, disappearing into my sister's room. Panicking, I ran to her door and burst inside. She was sitting up in bed, pale and shaking. "Did you see it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak. The next morning, we all admitted we'd seen and heard things. My mom confessed she had seen shadows moving inside the house, not just outside. My dad, ever the skeptic, tried to downplay it, saying we were all just tired and imagining things. But even he couldn't explain the loud thud we all heard later that day, coming from the attic. We decided to leave a day early. As we packed up, the house seemed to resist our departure. Doors that we'd left open were suddenly closed. My dad swore he'd left the car keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them hours later on the dining table. The final straw came as we were loading the car. My mom, who had gone back inside to grab one last bag, came out pale and shaking. She refused to tell us what she saw, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We drove away in silence, the once cozy cabin now a distant, chilling memory. None of us have talked about what happened since that night, but I know we all felt it, the sense that we were intruding in a place where we didn't belong, a place that didn't want us there. That Christmas was supposed to be an escape, a chance to make new memories. Instead, it left us with a story we'll never forget, and a vow never to spend the holidays away from home again. These were some of the most chilling stories experienced during Christmas, a reminder that even during the most festive times, the unexpected can happen. If you've ever experienced something similar or know someone with a scary story to share, leave it in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like these. Until next time, and have a safe Christmas.